Welcome to the clinical cookout. You know you need it, it's kinda scary, but mental health is necessary. Four educated queens taking the lead, hold their hands and they'll help you succeed. Lay your head back, relax, just like that. Now listen to, learn, and your problems will burn away. Cookout, you know, we got just what you need. At the cookout, your heart and mind we will be. At the cookout.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. We are qualified clinicians who will cover various topics on mental health and will sometimes provide community resources. We are not being paid by any organization for our content, and any information we provide is general and pertains to our own personal experiences. We do not provide psychotherapy, diagnoses, or treatment recommendations on air. Any concerns related to your individual mental health should be directed to your medical and mental health professionals. We are not responsible for others' decisions or the subsequent consequences.
Welcome back to the Clinical Cookout. Today, I have a question for our hot sauce. The hot sauce question is, what would you do or how would you feel if your partner was more successful than you on paper? Now, before you answer, this stems from a huge conversation that was happening on TikTok about a certain couple whose wife had a lot more, let's just say, credentials, a lot more accolades, a lot more achievements on paper, and people recognized her more than they recognized her husband. So there's been an ongoing debate about how the partner should feel if their partner is more successful, especially the female partner or the woman partner is more successful. So I wanted to get you guys' feedback. I mean, and we can always look at it because y'all all have good degrees, maybe even more than one. So just putting that out there.
So, okay, I genuinely believe that this is not as, so we're four women, and this might sound, biased to people, but I genuinely believe that this is not a hard concept for women. I mean, just historically speaking, women women couldn't always work. Women couldn't always go to college. So women, we are accustomed to being with men who are more credentialed than us, or like in general, like men have more credentials, or they higher up in whatever they work in than a woman is. So for us, it's not a big deal. It's like, so, okay, my husband, my man got more credentials or accolades than me. I think it's harder for men to do that. And it's an ego thing. I genuinely believe it's harder for men to accept a woman who has more than them or who is more well known than them. Like, I think that's just more difficult for men due to just your traditional gender concepts and bias. That's harder for men because of ego.
Okay. What do y'all think?
That's probably about spot on for me. I think it is a harder concept for men, just because, like, societally, men always made more money. Men still make more money, even doing the same job as women. They'll still make more money, but it's not. I wouldn't generalize it only to men. I would generalize it to some men. It depends on where the ego is in that man. Sometimes you get a man who has less ego, who are like, you know what, I want to be in the background. I don't need to be in the forefront of everything. And it's okay for my wife to be successful. But then when you have somebody with maybe a big ego and low self-esteem, that's a detrimental combination to have when you have somebody that may be a little bit more successful than you. And that's depending on how you measure success.
True. True. What I also think, the particular couple that we are taking this from, like pulling the conversation from, regardless of gender, if you have two competitive individuals, that's a whole different thing. If you got a competitive woman, then it might be a little different. Because if you are competitive by nature, some people do feel like they got to compete with their partner. You have people who feel like I'm in competition with my partner. And to me, that is a problem in a relationship. You should never feel that way about your partner. So in that case, if you feel like it's a competition,
Healthy competition is
healthy
not bad in a
competition,
relationship.
healthy
Yeah,
competition
because
is
you
cool.
can have some kind of competition to where it's like we're leveling up. in my relationship, I went we low key competitive. Like we kind of like, okay, what you got? Like I walk around like when I got my doctorates, I was like, call me Doctor Wifey, and I'll call you Master, because you got a master's. So we had like little jokes and stuff like that. But that kind of that kind of like dynamic has helped us both level up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to be successful. I want you to be successful. How can I help you? And then, like, when I'm introducing you to people, when I'm introducing you to, the higher ups that I work for, I want you to have a catalog too. So it's like a competition, but it's a little bit of healthy competition to where I can be proud of you still too. So I mean, there's that dynamic. That's why I said it's person dependent.
Oh,
No, I agree with that. I think that's more of the dynamic between me and my husband. It's the like I want you to level up. So the competition is not because I want you to fail, because I want to be better than you and I want you to feel bad about yourself. It's more of like I am leveling up for me, for my family, for my life, and I want to see you do the same thing. So I'm not gonna go and get my doctorate and then just sit back and let you, sit on the couch all day and not do nothing, right? Like we both gonna be leveling up and doing things together. So I mean, I think societally, yes, Ashley's right as far as Auntie Ashley is right as far as women, being used to the men being the provider, and that just was what it was for several years. And then men and their egos and not being able to accept it if a woman is more successful than them. But I do think that like certain people's mindsets are changing. So for my relationship, that's the case. I don't think either one of us are gonna like be upset that the other is successful. But there is a little bit of a competition. Like, yeah, I got my doctorate now. What you got? Where your master's at? Let's go. Come on, bring it.
and
Many a
see,
times I called
that's
Abraham
healthy.
bachelor's degree.
Wait, what?
Wow.
What?
There's many times I said, "Come on, bachelor's degree."
Shug.
Wow.
Why
But
are
you
you
know
like
what?
this?
But that you can do that in a situation where somebody is already secure and that you can do that. You if somebody who's not as secure or if the relationship is not already healthy, then that wouldn't be like the way y'all are saying it. Yes, that's healthy. We are pushing our partner. We want to push each other. Push each other to your best self, to your highest level. But then it's also the concept of can I be proud of you if that's just not your thing? What if college was never your thing? So I'm pushing you to try to get degrees and that's not your lane. That's not what you want to do. So it's more of what do you want in life and are you going for that? And I'm going to try to push you to that. Like, because in my dynamic, Elijah has a very high drive to keep going to school and to keep doing stuff, to keep leveling up, but he don't even like to have the spotlight. He don't like for people to even know what he's doing. So it's not even it can't be a competition if you don't want the recognition. Not even from me. It's like don't talk about my stuff. You don't have to tell people I'm this. You don't have to do that. Like he doesn't want it. So it would be no need for us to really it would be no need for him to have an ego about it because he don't even want people to know it. But for those people who are, especially like people who are in the spotlight, it almost feels like our recognition needs to at least be equal. And if it's not, one or more of us can't handle that. So what does that mean for the relationship? Because in the case that we talking about, what does that mean for them if he never gets a grip on that?
You
Like,
know
don't nobody
what?
know your name, sir. They know her.
You know what? I think that there is a part of this where I don't normally use this term, but I do think that this term is applicable to what we're talking about is the equally yoked. Like, I don't use that very often, but I do think that there may be an aspect of that that needs to be happening in order for the ego to not be so bruised. And last night I went to a place and they were talking about unstructured, being unstructured, and that if you don't have a man or even a partner that's unstructured, chaos is bound to happen. So if your partner can't handle the fact that you're successful or have all these accolades and these credentials, then are y'all even equally yoked? Are y'all even, is there structure a part of your relationship? And to me, I think that that particularly is why um, it being equally yoked is important if your person has a lot more, at least on paper, that shows that they're more successful. So that's just
Fully
my
agree.
thought.
Fully agree.
It depends on the way success is measured too, because success is not always measured by degrees. Um,
Right.
for me, are you a successful parent? Because I stayed at home for years. I just went back to work like 3 years ago, and I was still a success. And so, are you a successful parent? I was a successful wife and mother. I was still striving to do things. I've been successful in the careers that I've chosen. So it's you cannot have a degree and still be successful. I know people who have way less a degree than me and make way more money than I do. So it depends on which way your relationship defines success. Some men, and this is men with women that stay home, some men will say, I want my wife to be there for our kids. We have a successful family unit because of her, so we're successful as a whole. And then I've met women whose men stayed home. And I've seen men at all the PTA meetings, and they were at board meetings and at the school and stuff like that. And they were the head of spouse clubs and everything. And that was still a success too. So I think it depends on who you are and how you're measuring it and how your family values that.
So, throughout this hot sauce, you have heard us bring up ego. That was one of the first things I said, ego, and we kind of touched on that a little bit. So that's what we're going to touch on this episode. The main dish, we are going to talk about how our ego functions to make us act a certain way, make us feel a certain way, make us do a certain thing, even if we are unconscious of it. So let's get into the main dish. All right, y'all. So welcome back to the main dish. We are focusing on our egos and how our egos and other people's egos, our partners' egos, how it just affects us, affects our relationships, whatever may have you. So, dictionary definition of ego is your sense of self-esteem or self-importance. So somebody could have an inflated ego, which could be problematic. Somebody could have less of an ego. How has ego affected each of us? Let's start there.
Yeah, I guess I'll be the one to go first. Um, I have, as you all know, because we're all professionals and we all have to get licensed through our states and things of that nature. And typically, I feel like I can understand things pretty well. And I will tell you right now that for 1 year, at least a year, my ego has been really bruised and it has affected me mentally because of the state test that I've had to take, and I literally probably cried every other night because that's how hard it was. And when you go into things like that, because when my basic LSW that I got, I didn't even study for the test. Like I literally just walked in there. I took a class on like how to answer the questions, but I just literally walked in there, took the test, and passed. And now these like, this psychology test I'm taking is not like that. So it's making me feel like I'm incompetent. It's making me feel like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I start to feel like I'm not a doctor. So it's like playing into all these, like filtering into all these areas of my life. Like I can't really like go out and do anything because I'm like stuck studying. It's just affected me. So my ego has been bruised because it feels like, and my self-esteem is just like down here because I feel like I'm not where I need to be because of a stupid test. But I am trying to change that around in 2024. But I think I think it doesn't take much for the ego to be bruised, in my opinion. I think it could take something little, something small. Like, yes, my test is pretty big, but I also think that there's little things in life that happen that can bruise your ego. Um, and I don't know, like, I don't know what those things could be, but I do think that the big stuff matter, but also the little stuff too.
So I think it's bruised because the ego is your sense of self, right? So it's the identity that you've developed over time. When you get a bachelor's degree, right? You're like, okay, I could do it. I've done this. I've met the expectations. After high school, after the most basic expectation of graduating high school, I met this expectation. Then you get your master's, and now you're like, okay, I'm standing out. I'm really kind of, kind of climbing up to the elite category. I have my master's degree. I've mastered something, and I'm an expert at least some. I'm getting an expertise at least something. But then when you get your doctorate degree, you're in the top 1%. Like that's when you're like, okay, now I'm at the top of the fields. So I should know this. I should know that. I should have this expertise that nobody else has. But then you get a standardized test put in front of you, and then everything else comes into play that you didn't take into account. So you have a whole test bank, and there's a whole bunch of different answers. And then depending on the way you process, you might be thinking too deep into stuff. You might not be thinking deep enough. Or you just might not be a good test taker. You might have anxiety when it comes to taking tests. You might psych yourself out. There's a lot of other factors that come into the test taking that don't come into making those, that like getting your degrees and stuff like that. So then when you don't do as well as you want to do on it, it does play into your ego, because it's like, well, society said I need all of this to be the great. But then I become the great, and now I'm amongst all these great people who doing these great things, but I can't pass the test to show that I'm competent enough to be that. And it doesn't really speak to your competence, because standardized tests don't speak to anybody's competence, really. It just depends on how you are with taking the test. That's why they have classes that teach people how to take certain tests. So I mean, I just want a lot of people to have their doubts assuaged about them when it comes to that, because it's not necessarily a measure of competence. It's just, can you do the work that you said you can do? And you can do it if you can take the test. You can do it without the test.
So I'm gonna go a different route. I think it's important to, and Auntie Suge said it. You know, your ego is how your identity. So what is your identity wrapped in? Like for me, growing up, my identity was always wrapped in how smart I was, because that's what people pointed out. That like how smart you are, you get straight A's. So that became my identity. I'm the girl, the student that gets straight A's. So anytime I didn't, it was a hit to my ego. Like, okay, and maybe I'm not as smart. And for me, I think the biggest hit to my ego was probably when I didn't finish college in time, when it took me a little longer to get to where I wanted to get. And even now, I'm still not exactly where I always said I wanted to be. And it becomes difficult. I think that's where you can start to align like how the ego causes imposter syndrome. You don't feel like you fit in a space because you're not in a certain space. Like we've talked about this on here before, and you know, people have asked, I sit among three doctors. So that I have to really reflect on that sometimes and let that go to the back of my mind, to not feel like I don't know as much, or this is not a space I'm supposed to be in. That can be hard for some people to their ego if they can't do that. And if their identity is really wrapped in what I know, what I've learned, how smart am I? So now I had to I had to start to self-identify another way in order to not have a bruised ego all the time.
That's freaking good, because I didn't even think about that. It doesn't even dawn on me that you're not a doctor. Like, it doesn't dawn on me. Like, that's crazy. I didn't even think about that among the group.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
But that also speaks to how us as individuals, we always think other people are looking at us and thinking about us a certain way, when in reality, like nobody, like we don't even look at Ashley and be like, "Oh, you're not a doctor." Like nobody's thinking like that. But some people get so in their own heads and like feel like everybody around them is talking about them. Everybody around them doesn't believe they can be whatever it is that they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people have a hard time with functioning and being in relationships and just living life, because they're so worried about the outside world.
You know what that's called, Amber? Self-focused attention. And it's super big, like in high schoolers and stuff like that, where you think, you know how you walked into a room and you're like, everybody's looking at me, and it's like, life is not about you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to deconstruct sometimes, like
Mm.
Ashley was saying, Auntie Ashley was saying, like people telling you you're supposed to be this or you're supposed to be that. I think defining who you are outside of these labels that you're supposed to be is the key. Especially like when it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be this person that could take this test. Who supposed to? Who said that? Like who said that you were supposed to go in there and pass the test the first time. You're supposed to be a doctor. Who said that you're supposed to graduate college in the first 4 years after you graduate high school? Who said you're even supposed to go to college? I didn't even go to college immediately and don't even care that I didn't too. And so it's kind of like I think we wrap ourselves in all these cognitive distortions of what we're supposed to be doing instead of actually living and developing your identity through your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? One of the things that causes a lot of people a lot of psychological distress is what you're saying when there's this idea of what people want you to be or even what you want to be
Mm-hmm.
and who you actually are and what you actually are. And when those things are too far apart, so I lied. I am going to take it clinical because this is actually a clinical approach.
I sure am. I was.
As I was talking about it, I'm like, oh wait, isn't this like the Rogers guy or whatever? I don't use this type of approach, but I do know that there's like the ideal self and the actual self. And
Mm-hmm.
this speaks to ego too, because Freud actually did have a term that was like ideal ego or something like that, where your ego is like the person that you want to become, right? So like all of this stuff in psychology, it just builds up over the years and people like take it and use it in different ways. But what Rogers is saying is that there's this person that you actually are. And first off, you have to learn who that person is. Because as you're growing up, you get all these compliments about how smart you are, and you think you're just the smart person and there's nothing else to you. And then there's also this person that you want to be. And when you can't get there, or when you can't reach that expectation, or when there's no consistency or congruence between those two, that's when you become so distressed. You become super anxious, like, I can't be that. I'm only this. I don't feel good enough. And it's not a good way of living, I guess, so to speak.
Yep. And I was, as you said, you were taking the clinical. All I could think was, this is why people's shadow shows up. This is why the shadow self becomes a thing, because you start to repress all the things you feel like I'm not supposed to be that because I have to be this. So you repress it. It manifests in other ways, usually unhealthy ways. And now you asking yourself, well, I don't know why I act like this. Why do I react like this? It's because you are repressing your true self, that authentic self. Is not in congruence with what you are being told you are supposed to be. And now you just feel like, okay, I don't know. This is how people end up losing their sense of self, losing their identity. So that ego can cause a lot of damage to just our overall sense of who we are and how we show up in the world. Like, and taking it out of the realm of just like smart and academics, even when it comes to like when I became a mom, oh, I got ego bruised all the time. Because comparison will make your ego become bruised. You compare yourself to other moms. Like, well, I don't do this. I'm not a structured mom. Like I've never been a structured mom. I've never been a structured person. So when I see a mom like Shug, who literally has a lock on her family, it's like, I'm not gonna be that. That's just not who I am. So it's really, it had to be a thing where I was like, but I don't have to be that. We're two different people. Like, that's not what I have to be. That's not where I reside in comfort. So I have to be in congruence with myself so that my ego don't get bruised. You just have to be able to do that.
What were you saying, Chug?
Yeah,
To
you really
Ashley?
should.
I was saying, well, that's another thing that we put off on other people too. So sometimes we
Mhm.
put off the things that bruise our ego, and we take them and then we throw them on another person. We might say like, comparison is the thief of joy. I tell Ashley that all the time when she talks about the kind of mom I am and the kind she is. Like, you can't compare yourself to me because we have different value systems, different upbringings. We were raised different. You are not me. I am not you. But I think that we put those, like the things that bruise our ego, off on other people. So I've heard, I'm not structured, but too much structure is not good. So we also kind of like, all right, we take whatever we have and then we say, I'm not this, but in order to make myself feel better, I have to say something that's not good about you too. And so I don't know. I was just
Mhm.
thinking about how the ego plays a part into how we develop our own identity and then the identities that we put off on other people. And, or you get people that try to put you in a box that say, even though you're like this, then you probably don't have time for anything because you do too much of A, B, C, and D. So I think that we put those things off on our kids, based on our own egos, off on our friends, and just, don't take accountability into we have to find out who we are in this world and how we're going to relate to other people. So,
Mhm. And you basically just described projection, which is something that will happen if you don't self reflect and get your own ego intact. You will project onto others the bruised ego, the issues you see with yourself that you don't want to really accept, and you see other people doing something different, and it's like, well, I'm gonna project what I think onto you. And we do that a lot with people and don't even realize that's a really unconscious thing when we project. That's not something we pay attention to.
I would say when I don't talk about this often, but sometimes it'll come up, but I think it's applicable to what we're talking about today. Um, a lot of people, if you don't know, I was going to get married back in 2015 and it didn't work out. And prior to me being in that relationship, I had felt the best I had ever felt in my life. Like I was literally finishing up my master's. I was 20 pounds, 30 pounds lighter. I was just in my hot girl era in that moment, and I just felt good. And along came somebody, hyped me up, made me feel like they couldn't wait to be with me, all for that to come crashing and burning down in 2015, 6 months later. Um, and that time in my life, I don't really put out who I date or even who I'm with seriously because I just don't feel like it's people's business. But I did this time. And my save the dates went out. We already had a venue. I already had a wedding dress. My bridesmaids already had their dresses. And to have to call them or tell them that this was not happening was the one of the worst moments of my life. And I almost it was a hard time for me. And when I mean my ego and my self identity flew out the window, like I had never experienced nothing like that ever. And when we talk about projection and not really reflecting on all those insecurities, all that identity that has gone wherever it went, I ended up projecting some of that onto my next relationship because I built a wall around myself, like a wall that was like stone hard brick. Like he could not get me to move in with him. He could not get me to do a lot of things. I didn't even post this man. I was with this man for 2 years and he started to feel a certain way because I didn't post him on social media. And I was thinking, well, I did with my fiance and look what happened. Whole business put out there, just embarrassed, and I didn't want my ego to be bruised. And so that impacted my next relationship. And so I would say that, not obviously, that is a big moment in my life where my ego was bruised, but it took me 5 years to heal from that. And so when you don't do self-reflection and you start to project on other people, it will hurt somebody else. It can hurt somebody else, absolutely. And like Auntie Shug was saying, it bleeds onto your friends, it bleeds onto your family. If I don't have children, but if I were to have children, I am probably 100% sure that if I was in the moment and had a child with this person, it would have bled onto this child. And just everything around me was so affected. And so I do think it's important to self reflect and look at yourself. And that's a hard thing to do in the moment because you're so hurt and your ego's so bruised, but you have to reflect on yourself. And even if you have to, you may have to seek professional help because I was in such psychological distress that I didn't know what was happening and I couldn't verbalize it to my friends. So I built a wall from them. It was just a mess all the way around. But I do think that, what the aunties are saying, that reflecting, seeing somebody, understanding when things have gotten to a point, if you're cutting off people, if it's negatively impacting everything around you, that may be time that you need to talk to somebody. I did eventually, but yeah, that's my story. I am not that girl today. I am not that woman today, but it took a lot of rebuilding. A lot of rebuilding. A lot.
Ooh. See, and a story like that, when you reflect and you realize that, and you can say it took me 5 years to heal from that. People don't get a bruised ego doesn't get healed in a day. Like some people take that bruised ego, feel like it's healed, and then they do exactly what we talking about. It projects into their relationships, and that's how you get situations where somebody is, a famous person is saying, well, I'm the catch, because in reality, they know that their partner is, but you're not about to bruise my ego. I'm going to say that it's me because, and I'm going to put out all of these red flags that other people can see that literally stem from a bruised ego. I think that's a lot of times in our relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, that's where red flags come from. Red flags come from your ego and how you end up projecting onto other people, because then that becomes the behaviors. The behaviors exist because of your self-identity and your ego being bruised or being damaged. And that can happen from childhood. This is why it's important to speak life and pour into your children positively, because you could say one thing and that sticks with them forever. It is things I remember being told to me as a child from an adult I've never forgotten, because that's the formulation of self-identity in childhood. So you are already damaging a developing child's self-identity and bruising their ego. And what do you think that will look like as they become an adult?
Insecure adults. Adults with low self-esteem.
Indeed.
Big ego and low self esteem.
Hmm.
Right. Because you can get a self-inflated ego, but really truly be insecure. You put
Hmm.
that out, but truly you're insecure.
Yeah. Yeah. Ego is nothing to play with. Like it is it is nothing to play with.
Mm, 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 mm.
That's why I do egoless men.
That's why what?
I do egoless men. I cannot do a man with a big ego. I can't do it.
That egoless. I'm gonna need him to not be
Egoless.
ego. Not enough.
Sit
She
in the
got
back.
to have self-esteem. Dang.
Sit in the back. I need you to sit in the back because we
What
both can't be up here throwing our egos around. Because no,
she just talked about her trauma and how she got there. Okay.
Then she said, "I only date egoless men."
I do. No, and also real stuff like it. It just really it made me less. I don't say less, but it has me reflecting more on my ego. It's helped me become self aware. Let's just say that of
Mm,
certain things, and I've been able to like try to hold back or step back. Like, is this really my place, or is this really important for me to say? How will this person perceive what I have to say? Because just because I'm a doctor, or just because I have certain credentials, just because I've been in certain situations before, does not mean I need to speak on everything. It does not mean I have to do certain stuff or be involved in certain things. That does not mean that. And I think that part of me checking my ego is having that awareness,
mm,
is having that insight. um and so I've learned over time that it ain't always other people, sometimes it's you. And
mm.
so I had to check myself on certain things.
And you know what's interesting too is I don't think people realize how the ego, like we've been sticking to a real individualistic level of this, a real like micro scale level, how ego affects each of us or has affected us. But a larger scale, ego definitely affects us on a macro scale. Think about it. If a politician has a huge ego, that can have some effects for a whole lot of people. That can be a problem. If a doctor has a big ego and feels like, oh, I can't mess up this surgery, I get it right all the time, all right, like that then drives into other areas that can really affect other people in a negative way. It causes people to think that they can police other people. It causes people to think that I'm always right. If you have a huge ego or even a bruised ego and you're insecure, it's very hard to admit that you're wrong. It's very hard to say, yeah, no, I might be wrong here. No, you think you always right. And if you think you always right, you gonna mess something up. So the ego literally affects us in every realm of not only our own life, but on larger stages. Like we got politicians that can't come to decisions for nothing in the world because they can't drop their ego.
Okay. So this conversation was good and I think it was well needed. And I mean, I think we talked about a lot of different things in here. Like one thing we talked about was cognitive distortions, where what you actually think doesn't actually match up with reality. And so I think maybe checking yourself, um, seeing where you fit, seeing where you belong, and then making sure, as Keish said, not to project your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts about who you are or who you're not on other people is imperative. So, I mean, what we're saying is check egos. Is that keep your ego in check. And that, I mean, that's the definition of a healthy person, is like somebody who can do some self-reflection, look at themselves, and actually see how they're fitting into the world, how they're fitting into other people's space, and just living authentically. So, with that said, what y'all about to do?